guys, welcome to Multiverse. Today we are going to take a look at a comment that I've been hearing for years. Heck, even recently we had a post on the forum saying as much. DC Universe Online is dead. So people have been saying that DC Universe Online is dead for a long time now. And I'm going to have to go through a bit of history for DC Universe Online in order to be able to explain the various times when people thought DC Universe Online was dead. And I have to admit, there's once or twice that I thought that finally it might be accurate. So I hope you'll forgive me to give you a bit of a history lesson before we finally tackle the real question, whether DC Universe Online is dead or not. DC Universe Online is dead. That is something that I've been hearing not just since DC Universe Online started, but even before DC Universe Online went live, people were saying that the game was dead. I remember early on when DC Universe Online was released, even the good reviews were lukewarm at best. Pretty much everyone did seem to agree that the game was kind of fun, but no one thought that you could play this game for more than a month. No one could imagine people subscribing to this game. You have to remember that DC Universe Online started as a game that you had to purchase. You had to actually pay $60 to purchase the game, if I recall correctly. And obviously you had to spend $15 a month to be able to be a subscriber. But pretty much everyone agreed way back when that the game wasn't worth paying $15 a month. And even worse than that, even before the game was released, I knew some guys who were working in the gaming industry, and some of them were able to test out DC Universe Online. And even before DC Universe Online was released, the word was pretty much this game is not worth it. And it was easy to understand why. The first thing that even one day they were just talking about DC Universe Online, one of the main things they were trying to push is that idea that the next legend is you. That was their tagline at the time. Because somehow early on in the game's process, they were working really hard to keep you from being able to play Batman or Superman or Wonder Woman. So it was kind of strange to have a DC game that did not allow you to play DC characters. Ironically enough, you could recreate Wolverine, you could recreate Iron Man, you could recreate Deadpool. Okay, you can recreate a pretty darn good version of Deadpool. But somehow you could not play as Batman, Superman, and any DC characters at the time. And they were pretty much going out of their way to prevent us from being able to create iconic characters. There were ways to sort of do it still, but it was kind of hard to have an accurate version of those characters. So early on, one of the arguments against being able to play as Batman or Superman is that they were saying that they wanted to have only one Batman in DC Universe Online, one Superman, because they didn't want to have like 1,000 Batman in DC Universe Online. It somehow wouldn't make sense. How can you have more than one Batman? And it was a bit ironic because straight at the start of the game, they introduced players to the concept of the multiverse. So you could easily have Batman from Earth 1, from Earth 2, from Earth 3, from Earth 2055. So they're already built into the game was the reason to have more than one Batman or more than one Superman. But somehow they only wanted to have one Batman in the game. Oh, our little doggies are so sad. I think it was a bit of a bullcrap. I believe I have no proof of that. It's only what I think. But I think they were trying to make sure that they could sell legend characters, basically. If you could not play Batman or Superman in the game, what you could do is that you could play them as legend characters. So if somehow in the game you could not play Batman, you could play it as a legend character. Although early on you had to have pre-ordered the game to get the regular version of Batman. Early on, like when I started, I had to purchase the future Batman for $5 on the marketplace, and I believe that's pretty much where the idea came from to begin with. In order to be able to sell those legends, if we could not play, let's say, Superman in DC Universe Online, if we could not recreate Superman in DC Universe Online, we would have no choice but to play the legend version of the character. So the same with Batman, and eventually they even gave us a few extra versions of Batman. They gave us Modern Batman, the New 52 Batman, the Classic Batman, the Dark Knight Batman. So eventually we got a handful of Batman characters. But I strongly believe that the idea behind the next legend is you was also to be able to sell you legend characters at $10 each, or $5 in some case. Like I believe Future Batman was like $5. But luckily enough, I think Legends weren't as popular as they thought. They even stopped making them. At some point, they announced that they were going to make a Grodd Legend character, but ended up never releasing it. They pretty much shelved it. So I guess thanks to Legends not being that popular, eventually they did give us the option to be able to recreate Batman by releasing the awesome Batman cowl that you're seeing right now. Although in this case I had to cheat a bit since I'm using a material. Sadly the materials cover the eyes of the character, so in order to be able to see the eyes I'm using the bug goggles as well. Although even if DC Universe Online seems to have purchased, obviously they have purchased a license to be able to make a DC game, there seems to be some licensing issue, so maybe it's not the Legend thing, maybe it is some licensing agreement that we're not aware of that somehow they have to respect, which sometimes prevents them from giving us the iconic styles we're asking for. For example, the Superman emblem that you're seeing on the wall. For some reason they finally gave us an accurate Superman emblem, but somehow they only gave it to us for a limited time. So the same with the BVS emblems. At some point we got the Batman vs Superman emblems. When the Batman vs Superman movie was released in theater, we were able to get they call the swag bag, where we had like the 3 emblems: the Batman emblem, Superman emblem, and Wonder Woman emblem. Sadly, those emblems were removed from the marketplace again because of some sort of licensing issue. We were never really told exactly why, but we know it has something to do with some licensing issues. So maybe early on there was also such licensing issues that prevented them from giving us an actual way to be able to recreate an accurate version of Superman. That could be another option to explain the whole the next Legend is you, and to explain why they were going out of their way to make sure that we could not really recreate an accurate version of Superman. So early on you had to either sort of come up with your own character, or you could recreate some iconic characters, just not DC ones. So as I said early on, they were trying to push the idea that the next Legend is you. And obviously you could recreate a somewhat generic looking superhero, which made it a bit weird. Like if people wanted to play a generic superhero, there was way back when there was already Champions Online. There was what's the other one? City of Heroes that already allowed you to play a generic character. Like if you wanted to play a generic superhero, there were already other options. The one advantage that DC had over those other games way back when, well, actually they had a few advantages, but one of the advantages would have been to be able to play as Batman or as Superman, like an accurate one. Like you could already recreate some of those characters in City of Heroes or Champions Online thanks to the character creator. But in DC Universe Online, in theory, you should have been able to create a legit version of Batman or a legit version of Superman. And somehow, the one game that should have allowed that pretty much went out of their way to be able to prevent that. Doesn't mean that you could not create iconic characters, though. You could recreate iconic characters, but from other companies than DC. Although technically, the Phantom was published by DC at some point, so creating the Phantom was creating a sort of iconic DC characters in a roundabout way. And this is a character that I started using early on. I created maybe half a dozen character, or I recreated my character maybe half a dozen times. The first time I think I created a sort of Batman character, but I wanted to create a Batman character from the big white north, if you like. So I wanted to make basically a white costume Batman character. I played that character for a bit and deleted it, and then I tried another one. The other one I tried was looking too much like a Dungeon and Dragon type character, like I was playing a character with dual wielding swords, and it was pretty much sort of almost a rogue from Dungeons and Dragons. And I thought I can already play a rogue in the DDO, so let's go for something more superhero-like, or at least masked adventure-like. So basically I went through basically half a dozen characters before I finally ended up on the Phantom, and this is the character that I played for the first year and a half that I played DC Universe Online. So I had made basically a gadget character that was using dual pistols, and that was as you can see, that was pretty darn close to our friend the Phantom. In the meantime, we got like a nice belt with dual pistols, which we didn't have at the time. I think at the time I was using the square buckled belt. And eventually we got the pistols in the back. The Phantom never had those, but I thought, let's add those anyway, because why not? But as you can see, you could recreate a pretty darn good version of the Phantom early on. But I was using gadget powers, and I have to admit, gadget powers take some getting used to. I'd say they're a bit challenging to use, to say the least. Later on, I switched. I've had a group of friends who started playing DC Universe Online, and then I switched to playing a Magneto character. If you guys saw me on the forums, my name on the forums is Magneto First Class. That's where it came from. I have a group of friends who started playing DC Universe Online. I decided to create a new character to be able to play with them. And I was using a character that was using mental powers, so I thought, which iconic character could I create that could use those powers? And somehow I ended up creating a Magneto, but it was a hero character, so I made it Magneto First Class, because in First Class he sort of kind of starts as a hero, or at least friendly with Charles Xavier. So I thought a Magneto First Class could be a nice way to be able to make a heroic version of Magneto. Even in the comics, there's a few times where he did become a hero, but way back when I decided to go with the First Class version. And using the mental powers, and especially the powers from the telekinetic tree at the time, I was able to recreate a pretty darn good looking version of Magneto and recreate the powers that Magneto was using. And that's the character that I've used for quite a while. Actually, it is the same character that we're seeing right now, but eventually I changed Magneto First Class into my multiverse character, pretty much around the time where I started my channel, or a bit maybe after. And it was much easier to learn to play as a controller. Well, actually, it was much easier to play with my Magneto character. I guess he had a lot more survivability thanks to the various shields and mental powers at the time. So the character was, let's say, harder to kill, and I would say you even did a bit more damage way back when. And when we had weapon mastery, holy crap, my Magneto was a machine. I way too often I would do even more DPS than DPS players, thanks to weapon mastery. So I was able to play as a controller, use weapon mastery, and do a lot of DPS. And around the time of All of Powers Part 1, I was even able to tank with my character. I was able, thanks to, we had basically a white mod that if you blocked, it gave you, I think, I forget, it gave you a lot more defense. So thanks to my white mod, thanks to being able to cast a few shields to have some survivability, I was able to sometimes play both as a controller and as a tank when we had no tank in the group. So it was pretty awesome, and if I used weapon mastery, I could even do a lot of damage. But again, where early on, a lot of people were saying that DC Universe Online was dead. Some of the reason in retrospect for that most likely was DC Universe Online was trying to be different from other MMOs, which is a big no-no, I guess, with a lot of players. A lot of players are used to certain games, and they're used to how certain games are being played. Like, I know those guys who've been playing, who played EverQuest for like 10 years, and whenever they would try another game, they would always compare it to EverQuest, and if the game didn't work exactly like EverQuest, the game was no good. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of the people who playtested DC Universe Online, or who tried it during the beta, they expected DC Universe Online to be like other MMOs, which it was not really. DC Universe Online was trying very hard to be different from other MMOs, and I guess that dropped a lot of players the wrong way. So they started saying that they didn't really get into DC Universe Online because it wasn't like the other games that we're used to. So that might be one of the factors. And sometimes some people seem to mistake the way they feel about the game with the way everyone else feels about the game. And then they'll say that the game is dead, and they'll assume that everyone else don't like the game either, which sadly is not really true. So early on, we had a lot of people who were, let's say, a little bit dissatisfied because this Universe Online was not like other MMOs. Which in my book is a great thing, because I'm not playing other MMOs, I'm playing DC Universe Online. If I wanted to play those other MMOs, that's what I would be doing. But one of the reasons I'm playing DC Universe Online, it is exactly because it is not like other MMOs. But then early on in the process, there's a few things that did hurt the game. Early on, there wasn't that much content at release. So there's a lot of players who went through the content very quickly, and then they were complaining that there wasn't enough content. So that was one of the arguments, saying that DC Universe Online was dead or would be dead. It's because it didn't have enough content. And to make matter worse, there was the big Sony hack, and for about I think a month, the game was shut down. The Sony servers, the Sony network were down. So for I think it was 45 days. I seem to recall seeing that number. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but let's say for argument's sake it was 45 days. So for 45 days the game was down. People who had paid to play the game sadly just could not play the game. I'm not sure if they got a refund. I know that at some point they gave a few gifts to players who had struggled through the Sony hacks. They gave a special Batman call and a few other items that I forget about. But the game was hit pretty hard. A lot of players gave up on the game right there and then. And at some point they had to merge the servers because there just wasn't enough players on each servers. And at that point, I guess it would have been easy to believe people when they said that DC Universe Online was dead, because it did go through it did go through some challenges at that time, and that is probably also what was the final nail in the coffin that made the game free to play. And obviously, since the game became free to play, a lot of changes were made. And again, people were used to how the game was when they had those changes, when the game was made free to play, and a lot of things worked differently, or a lot of new players came in that weren't playing exactly like the old guard. Like there were a lot of made up rules that had been created in the early days of DC Universe Online. Like when people would duel, they would not use colas. When people would roll on loot, they had certain rules about quote-unquote ninja looting, and a lot of new players, first they didn't know those rules, so they weren't following them, and they were using whatever they could to gain an edge. If during a duel drinking a cola was needed to be able to beat the other guy, they would do it. During a mission, if they could rule on loot, they would do it. They weren't aware of any made up ninja looting rules. So a lot of players at the time were dissatisfied by that, and again, that was another cycle of, okay, this game is dead, because it wasn't exactly the same game as it was before, but also the main difference is that the population was quite different. There was a lot more of what people often would call casuals, and so for an old timer or an elite player, see that as you will, for them the game was dead. It had let in a lot of those players who weren't exactly playing like them, so the game was dead, which obviously it wasn't. Free to play pretty much, from what I understand, free to play pretty much saved the game. The profits went up for like 700%, and it brought in a lot of new player. It brought in a lot of fresh new cash in the game, and also the game had to do a lot of cutbacks. One of the first thing they did cut from the game was the cinematics. Early on, they were making those pretty awesome cinematics, but sadly, those cinematics must have been a bit costly to make. So later on, they pretty much got rid of making those what we call the comic book cinematics that kind of look like comic book artwork. They still made cinematics afterwards, but it would use the game's asset as opposed to creating a new asset, especially to have the comic book cinematics. People don't seem to understand that the comic book cinematics probably were expensive. They had to pay for extra artwork. They had to pay for the animation, the extra animation for the artwork, and probably other things I failed to recall. So the first casualty of the game going free to play was the cinematics. Basically, this Universe Online was trying at the time to increase profit and lower the costs of producing the game in order to be able to keep the game alive. And it worked. It brought a lot of new players and increased the population of the game quite a lot. But also another thing was that a lot of players were, well, there are players who were playing pretty much only PvP, or mostly PvP. So whenever there were changes made to PvP, like during the time of Origin Crisis, there was a revamp in the PvP system. And again, a lot of players said, oh, the game is dead, PvP was no longer the way they were used to. And basically DCUO, what they tried to do, they tried to monetize PvP. And that was a mistake. That was a mistake on two fronts. The first reason is that a lot of PvP players seems to play the game as a free-to-play player. So already when DC Universe Online had introduced layers, and they had introduced things like backups or orbital strikes or supply drops. So if you were a free-to-play player, you didn't have access to those. So it would give an edge to legendary players or premium players who had purchased the layer system. So that was one of the things that made a lot of PvP players say, okay, this game is dead, I'm not playing it anymore, whatever. And then later on, when we got the revamp, when we tried to monetize PvP, again, a lot of players said that, okay, PvP is dead, we're not playing that game anymore. And the point is, depending on how you play DC Universe Online, and also what server, that's another thing. Like if you mostly play PvP, obviously PvP is not as active as PvE for a whole bunch of reasons. From what I understand, at the most, in the prime time of PvP, there was roughly maybe 20% of the player base that did play PvP. So it could lead people easily to think that if they were only playing PvP later on, yeah, I could understand someone who only plays PvP to think, oh, the game is dead, there's no one playing PvP. Which is not exactly accurate. But there are a few times when, I have to admit, I really thought that, yeah, maybe this time they went too far and maybe the game is dead. The first thing was during Origin Crisis. When they had Origin Crisis, there was a lot of gatekeeping going on. There's a lot of players who would exclude other players from playing the Origin Crisis missions. I remember even myself when I would try to play the raids, even though I had played I forget which one, the Paradox Wave raid, and I knew how to play it and I had succeeded in playing it. Later on, when I would try to get into groups, they would just kick me out. The reason for that was quite simple. I did not have the latest mods. I was not lucky playing the missions. I did not get those latest mods. And also, I did not get the plans to craft the mods. And the mods at the time were very expensive on the broker, and the plans were very expensive on the broker too. So by the time I was able to gather the money to be able to craft those mods, Son of Trigon was already released, so it was pretty much pointless by then. But there was a lot of gatekeeping that was going on during Origin Crisis, and a lot of players just didn't like that. So a lot of players, and also they tried to make Origin Crisis for endgame players, if it makes sense, for quote-unquote elite players. So a lot of more casual players decided to give up on the game. It was a lot of players would have called that at the time a league killer. A lot of leagues disappeared overnight. Heck, my league disappeared overnight. We weren't a big league, we were just a handful of people. But sadly, a DLC like Origin Crisis was a big turn-off with pretty much everyone in my league, and they all left. And not just my league, a lot of players were turned off by Origin Crisis, and they left. And I remember at the time, the devs realized that they had made a mistake. I remember Spittle even said that they would never do something like that again. That they had made a mistake, and that it was the last time they would ever make something like that. But sadly, the harm was done, and a lot of players had left the game. And at that time, when people were saying the game was dead, I have to admit, I would have been tempted to believe them. And again, depending on the server where you played, it was even worse. Like if you played on PS4, on the hero side, wasn't that big an issue. There was plenty of players on that server. But if you played as an evil villain on PC, even on the US server, holy crap, the game was then you would think that yes, the game is dead. There wasn't that many players, and it got even worse a bit sometime later. And from what I understand, on the European server, it was even worse. So I can understand that depending on the server you're playing on, it could seem that sometimes there's not that many players and that the game effectively is dead. But you have to remember that there are other servers. And also, as I mentioned early on, there wasn't that much content, so a lot of people thought there just wasn't enough for them to do. So the first DLC we got in DC Universe Online was Fight for the Light, or something like that. And it's a DLC that brought us the Green Lantern power, which was something that a lot of people were waiting for and hoping for. People thought it would add us a new city. People were hoping that it would add Coast City. It kind of did in a roundabout way. There is a Coast City map, but it's only Fairest Air that is kind of destroyed. And we have to fight a whole bunch of evil Red Lanterns. So they did add a Coast City map in the game, but it's just one alert. People were expecting a map almost like a Gotham or Metropolis. Sadly, that wasn't the case. And also at the time, even though they gave us the quote-unquote Green Lantern powers, although at the time they were saying it didn't make characters actual Green Lanterns, they were like just deputized or something like that. So even then, even with the Green Lantern powers, we still did not have the option to create a good-looking Green Lantern character. Like, this is about as close as we could get to creating a Green Lantern character way back when. And then later on, we got another DLC. After Fight for the Light, we got the Lightning Strike DLC, which gave us lightning powers. We could technically create a Flash character before then, but with the Lightning Strike DLC, then we could have a Flash character that actually used electric powers. Sadly, again, even then, way back when, this is about as close to creating the Flash as we could at the time. Although, personally, I preferred to use the Justice League emblem, but I know a lot of players who, when they were creating the Flash way back when, they would use the Leaf emblem. The Leaf emblem was pretty much what people were using to try to fake out having the Flash emblem. It sort of kind of worked, but I much preferred using the Justice League emblem. So even though we had, and also we got a new city, we got Central City. Although technically it wasn't really a city, it was more like a handful of city blocks. But way back when, it was the first edition that we got, where we got sort of a new city in the game. And later on we did get other cities, but it was alternate versions of cities we already had. Like, we got a few alternate Metropolis, we got a few alternate Gothams. We did get two alternate Central City, one during Origin Crisis and one during Deluge. So technically we're getting new cities. Like, there's a version of Metropolis where you have Mogo and Ranks and a whole bunch of evil lanterns all throughout the map. But that is pretty much the only way we got new cities, is by reusing some of the assets that already existed. But way back when, even with two DLCs that had been added to the game, people still thought that there wasn't enough content. So again, we would often see people saying how the game was dead. And again, very often it was because the game wasn't... Some players didn't really get what they were hoping for from the game. So again, they mistook them being unhappy with the game with everyone else being unhappy with the game. Because when you went to the Watchtower or even the Hall of Doom, there was plenty of players, and even playing missions. There was plenty of players to play missions. So it was kind of hard to take people seriously when they were saying that the game was dead. And slowly but surely, the game started giving players what they were asking for. There are players who had been asking for being able to create a Green Lantern pretty much since I started playing the game. And I started playing the game when the game went free to play, because before that I heard, before the game went free to play, I would hear horror stories, and also as I mentioned, the best reviews were lukewarm at best, and a lot of players were telling me how the word of mouth was pretty bad with this game. So a lot of players would tell me about this game, would tell me that it wasn't a very good game. Or again, at best, some would say they enjoyed it for a bit, but it wasn't worth playing for months and months and months. After a couple of weeks, a month at most, you were pretty much done from the game, at least according to the people I was talking to. But eventually, once the game went free to play, I thought, I have nothing to lose, it'll cost me nothing, so I downloaded the game, tried it out. And I was, after 3 days, I decided to become premium, and I purchased the future Batman Legend character for $5, so I became a premium player. And a month later, maybe less than a month later, basically when Lightning Strikes came out, I toyed with the idea of just purchasing the DLC. And then I realized that, I may as well go be legendary. And I've been legendary ever since. And pretty much since I started playing, people had been asking for a Green Lantern emblem, for a Green Lantern aura. Because ironically enough, at some point when they started giving us auras, they gave us a golden aura, which was perfect to recreate an evil yellow lantern, but somehow we couldn't get a green lantern aura. And again, it was the argument usually that was used was licensing issues. Apparently, the green aura was, I don't know, an iconic thing that DC didn't want DC Universe Online to use, for reasons. I think one of the arguments was the Green Lantern movie was about to be released, and that we're very, very protective of the Green Lantern movie. Sadly, or thankfully, I'm not sure how to properly say that, the Green Lantern movie was a disaster. I'm not sure if I forget the timeline. If we finally got some Green Lantern stuff after the Green Lantern movie, or if we started getting some before. But eventually, after asking and asking and asking, we finally got a green aura for our Green Lantern character, and even better, we even got a set of gear for our Green Lantern character. People had been asking for a Green Lantern emblem. Apparently, that was a big no-no way back when. But eventually, the compromise that they had at the time, poor Crypto. The compromise that was decided at the time was to give us a Green Lantern set of gear with the emblem in the set of gear, so we couldn't change the emblem. So we got the Scion of Iron set of gear, which gave us an awesome Green Lantern set of gear and an awesome Green Lantern emblem. So that was pretty much the first crack in where they were starting to give us what we were asking for, and where they were starting to give us the option to be able to create iconic character. Sadly, it was a big blessing, because at that point, for like 2 years, 3 years, they had been pushing that the next legend is you tagline. So they had pretty much, I would say, chased away a lot of players who wanted to play as a Batman, who wanted to play as a Green Lantern, and somehow they could not within this Universe Online, so they went to play other games, basically. So they had chased the players who wanted to play iconic characters, and the players that remained basically bought into that tagline. They bought into that idea that the next legend is you. So they weren't very warm to the idea of iconic characters. I've seen more than my fair share of players who complained that I was using an evil clone of a famous character at the time. So there was a bit of a transition period where people had to get into the idea, to get rid of that idea that the next legend is you, and to warm up to the idea that, hey, we can now create iconic characters. So there was a bit of a transition period, I would say. But eventually, finally, we were able to create a nice looking Green Lantern if we wanted to. And at the time, they also gave us a Yellow Lantern costume, but they didn't stop there. Later on, we got the Red Lantern costume, Blue Lantern costumes. Eventually, we got all the lanterns, except, ironically enough, we did not get a White Lantern costume just yet. Although we got the White Lantern emblem now, so we can pretty much recreate any White Lantern we would like to. But slowly but surely, we started getting all the Lantern costumes. So the option to be able to create any Lantern we wanted was finally available. It took quite a few DLCs. It took basically 3 War of the Lights DLC to be able to get all those costumes. And I'm trying to remember if maybe we got even some of those suits in later DLCs. It's been a while. I would have to look it up. But anyway, the idea is that eventually we got a set of gear for each Lantern Corps, except the White Lantern Corps somehow. And eventually we got the evil time capsules. Which brought us basically all the Lantern emblems. So finally, we were able to create any Lantern we wanted. And we were able to recreate a more quote-unquote accurate version of the Lantern. Like the Scion of Iron style was awesome, but the only issue, it had a lot of textures that normally Green Lanterns didn't have. Although even here, like you can see, there's a few, let's say a few lines, a few textures that shouldn't be on the costume, but sadly it's a small compromise to be able to make an awesome looking Green Lantern. So now finally we had the aura, we had the emblem, we had pretty much anything we needed to be able to create an awesome looking Green Lantern. And not just an awesome looking Green Lantern, all the lanterns. But it came in time capsules. So people had to basically, time capsules would drop in the game, and then you had to pay basically $1 per time capsule to be able to open them. And it became somewhat a lottery system, if it makes sense. Which, again, a lot of people complain about. And again, it was, according to a lot of people, this Universe Online was dead. It was a sure sign that the game was dying. They were resorting to time capsule, to basically loot boxes. So it was obvious the game was dead. They were desperate for cash, or however you can phrase it. And again, the cash race came back. This Universe Online is dead. You would see plenty of people in the forums claiming that. So it was the end. But somehow this Universe Online kept on going after that. And even then, and even more, we started seeing more and more time capsule. And I can understand for players who don't like time capsule, I guess for them the game is dead. That's quite possible. But if you really want items from the time capsule, you can buy them from the broker. I know that by now we got like I don't know, a dozen time capsule. So it may be rough to try to purchase all the items you need from the broker, but it still can be done. But it does require that you play the broker. And if somehow you do not want to open time capsule or to pay to open time capsule, because you can get some stabilizer for free if you play the fragmentation mission. So you could open those free time capsule and then farm for cash to be able to purchase the rest that you're missing. And the time capsule brought us a lot of good stuff. They brought us the lantern emblems. They brought us some awesome styles. The argument would be that
in my house.
The argument would be that they could give us those styles without the time capsule, but it's obvious that they weren't going to do that. Although we do still get some awesome style without the time capsule, like we got the Owl Suit style, we got the Johnny Quick style. So we still got some very good style. Although in some cases, like the Blackhawk style, it's not that the style looks bad, but personally I don't really like it. But the Mara style was pretty awesome that we can get without time capsule. So we still get some pretty awesome style without the time capsule. But the time capsules did allow us to have some awesome style or some awesome emblems. Like it did allow us to have an awesome Batman Beyond set of gear. Also, around the time that we got the Batman Beyond set of gear, I couldn't help but notice an upgrade in the quality of the styles. And I guess eventually once they stopped supporting the PS3, that also did allow them to be able to increase the quality of the styles a bit, or increase the quality of the textures a bit. And even again, not too far ago, we got a new texture for the Batman NPC, for the Wonder Woman NPC. Heck, Wonder Woman got even a brand new model. Batman just got a reskin, but they gave a new model to Wonder Woman. And I believe a lot of that comes from whatever fresh new cash the time capsules brought into the game. But again, the time capsules are very unpopular with a lot of players. So again, those players see that as a sign that it is the end. DC Universe Online is done for. But somehow it's still going fine. And not only is it still going fine, they're slowly upgrading the game. Like some people also use the argument, are saying that the graphics are outdated. So seeing how DC Universe Online did not update the graphics means that DC Universe Online is dead, obviously. They don't seem to realize that the graphics do get updated, but slowly at a time. Sometimes you'll go into a map and you'll see that, oh, they tweaked a few things here and there. They tweaked the map a bit. You'll see that with NPCs. They just did that with Batman and Wonder Woman recently. A year before that, they had upgraded the Superman model. So you can see a slight upgrade in not just in new content, but even they're going back into some of the older content and they're upgrading it. But sadly, they don't. My guess is they don't have the resources to be able to upgrade everything all at once. So they're taking baby steps. They're upgrading one thing at a time, and eventually they'll have upgraded maybe not everything, but a whole bunch of stuff that needs to be upgraded. For example, this is a Dark Spectre set of gear. Eons ago, this was about as close to recreating our friend the Batman as we could get. This was the Batman-inspired set of gear we had at the time. Again, just an example of how they were really going out of their way to stop us from being able to recreate our friend the Batman. At the time, this was pretty much as close to recreating Batman as we could, using the Batman hoodie. This was the only or one of the few Batman emblems we had in the game, and it pretty much was the best Batman emblem we had in the game. Maybe not, there's another option we had. And this would be another option to kind of create a Batman type character. Although it would look more like a Batman Beyond or actually Batwoman, which makes sense because it's the actual Batwoman t-shirt. Although, ironically enough, when they gave Batwoman her new emblem, they pretty much gave her the Batman Beyond emblem. So you could try to recreate a somewhat good-looking Batman Beyond character way back when. Eventually they would give us the new 52 Batgirl suit, which again wasn't really a Batman set of gear, but it was closer than some of the options we had before. So it gave us a nice pair of gauntlets we could use, a nice belt. And for the emblem, sadly, we didn't have a nice Batman emblem, so the circled wing was the best option, but it gave us a sort of Batman call. And of course, it gave us a Batman cape. So for those who were not able to get the Batwoman cape for some reason, the Batgirl cape could do the trick.
How long?
Although by now we can create a pretty darn good version of our friend Batman. And eventually they gave us the BVS emblem, then they gave us the Batman Rebirth emblem, but finally this year, they finally gave us the yellow oval Batman emblem. But to get back to the textures, they have been giving us new models and new textures as time goes by, and they have been upgrading the graphics is what I'm trying to say. Like this is the original Dark Spectre suit we had in the game, and this is the Dark Spectre version from 2018. So they are updating the graphics, but one step at a time. And in some cases, they are monetizing the way the update, sadly. In this case, although in this case we got it as a free gift when it was first released, and then later on they added it to the marketplace for those who did not have the suit. They did the same also with the Speed Force Spectrum. And now the latest one they've done is the House of L set of gear. And another thing they did in a roundabout way that kind of updates the graphics is they've added materials. So here you can see this is a Dark Spectre suit with the blue chroma material, and it gives basically a new look to the suit. It basically gives a new life to what was an old style. So even if you use a style that has outdated graphics, let's say, you can still punch up the graphics with some of the new materials. So in a roundabout ways, they are improving the textures, but just not the way people think. Somehow some people expect them to update all the graphics all at once, right now, today, and sadly they don't seem to understand the amount of work that represents, and that odds are DCUO does not really have the resources to be able to do all that all at once. So as I was mentioning, they are upgrading the graphics, but a little bit at a time. Like originally, a lot of the emblems only had a regular version of the emblems, and eventually they added an enhanced version of the emblems. In the case of the Green Lantern emblems, when we first had the time capsule, we only had the regular version of the emblem. The same with the Future Batman set of gear. Originally, there was only a regular version of the Future Batman set of gear. But eventually they gave us an enhanced version of the Future Batman and also an enhanced version of all the Lantern emblems. Probably to make up for the fact that along the line, when we had the first time capsule, enhanced emblem were not a thing at the time, but eventually they were able to give us a regular version of the emblems and an enhanced version of the emblems. So for example, once we got the Flash emblem, we had a regular version and an enhanced version of the emblem. And eventually, of course, they gave us the Flash cowl, so that was pretty much all we were missing to be able to create a pretty darn good looking Flash character. Obviously, it would be nice to be able to have a pair of gloves for our Flash character, but maybe someday. And I mentioned the Flash cowl, but first we got the Batman cowl. I remember when they first added this item, holy crap, some of us were really happy. It is also something that was highly requested. Sadly, as often happens, when they first released the cowl, there was a bit of controversy. People were not happy because of the price of the cowl. It is true that the cowl was $20 at the time. It was a little bit pricey, but if you did not want to spend $20, you could wait for a sale. Eventually, there were quite a few 50% off sale, so you could get it for $10. And even not too long ago, during the 80th anniversary of Batman, I think it was down to $5, maybe a bit less than that. So there were options to wait for a sale if for some reason you did not want to spend $20. But again, at the time, people saw that as too expensive, and it was another sign of the apocalypse, showing that the game was dead. The devs are desperate for cash. They're overcharging for one item. So the game, obviously, it was a sign that the game was dead or dying. So sadly, whenever there's a big change that is made to the game that some people don't agree with, a lot of people again seems to go with the perspective that if they don't like a change, no one else likes the change, and that means that no one likes the game, and that means that the game is dead. I have to admit there were a few close calls. Basically the summer when we got Origin Crisis, there was a lot of gatekeeping happening in Origin Crisis, and a lot of players gave up over that. And also the challenge, they cranked up the challenge, trying to please, let's say, elite player, the top, I don't know, the top 1% players, but it ended up turning off 90% of the rest of the population. So again, a lot of the players left, and a lot of league disappeared overnight. So that was the one time where I have to admit that was a close call. And also trying to monetize PvP, that was another mistake. It turned off all the players who were playing PvP for free. So again, for them, DC Universe Online was dead. So that was another argument to say that DC Universe Online was dead. And also later on, we got game update 46, if I recall correctly, where they pretty much changed how the game worked. So basically, at that time, they had changed a lot of things, a lot of the ways that DC Universe Online worked, and that did turn off a lot of players. A lot of players again gave up on the game right there and then. That killed basically my second league. After Origin Crisis, I had rebuilt my league with other friends. I had another group of friends who decided to give a try to DC Universe Online, and we decided to make an evil villain group. So they created a villain league, and we had a lot of fun. But then when we got game update 46, they pretty much all threw in the towel and decided, okay, we're not playing that anymore. So for a second time, it killed my league, and I know that it did the same to other leagues. So that was another close call, I would say. Basically, whenever they made big changes that meant big changes and fundamental changes to the game, a lot of players pretty much left when that happened. From time to time, we see players that do come back, but I'd be curious to see how many players today have been playing for a long time, and how many players who gave up on the game decided to come back later on. And also another challenge was for DC Universe Online to bring in new players, which was probably another reason why a lot of people are saying that the game is dead because of the quote-unquote low population, is that a lot of new players would try the game, and a lot of them would quit just at the first mission. They would not even finish the Brainiac mission. Halfway through the mission, or sometimes in the mission, they would throw in the towel and say, I'm not playing this game anymore. And there's a few reasons for that. I have some friends who went through that. Basically, in that first Brainiac mission, there was quote-unquote a tutorial to show the countering mechanics, like how to block break, and I forget the other one. But a lot of players, once they reached that point, they thought that the enemy was invincible, or they thought that the game was bugged, and they would quit on the game right there and then. And also apparently even before, early on in the mission, there are some players who would quit on the game right there and then. That was around the time, I don't think Xbox was live yet. They were working on Xbox, and I think a lot of new people who were testing out the game for Xbox would quit on the game. So they finally realized that this early mission, this first mission, would turn off a lot of players. And also another thing that we couldn't help but understand is why there was not more DC Universe in DC Universe Online. Like in that first mission, you basically fought a whole bunch of generic robots. You saw Superman, but you saw him at the very end of the mission, and then that was it. So they pretty much ever since then they've been trying to change the tutorial, the Brainiac ship mission, and ironically enough, that is what made me start making videos. There was this post or this quote by Spittles where he was explaining that during that first mission they were losing a lot of players. A lot of players could not finish that mission, and it was a pretty big number, so it was pretty problematic. So they had to find solutions to that problem. So as time went by, they tweaked that mission a bit. And again, just not too long ago, we got a brand new version of that mission. And finally, it is a much better incentive or an example of this Universe Online for new players. Like right at the start of the mission, you start with either Lex Luthor or Superman. As you play through the mission, you see Green Lantern, you see Flash, or if you're a villain, you see Sinestro, you see Zoom. At the end of the mission, you have all the three mentors. For villains, you have Joker, Cersei, and Luthor. For heroes, you have Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman. So finally, you have a lot of DC in that first mission. Someone who wants to play a game with DC characters finally can do that. Again, it is something, when Spittle mentioned that first mission, how it was problematic, that is when I started making videos for new players. And my very first video was basically that Brainiac mission, hoping to be able to at least help a few players get through that mission. I was thinking that if players get stuck playing that mission, they would look up for maybe a way to be able tutorial for that mission, and I made such a video. Although the one big mistake I made way back when was underestimating the cleavage there is between DC fan and Marvel fans. Basically, I'd created a Wolverine character. If you guys look at my very first video, you'll see I created a Wolverine character, and to me it was awesome. It was cool that eventually I would see a Wolverine fight alongside the Batman, or Wolverine defeat the evil Bane. To me, it was like a crossover, a dream crossover sort of. But somehow it wasn't seen like that. For DC players were insulted. Many wrote to me about that, whether on their forums or even on these videos. They would complain that I was using an evil Marvel character for a DC game. How dare I do that? And I guess in retrospect I can see their points. I completely underestimated the cleavage there was with the Marvel fan base and the DC fan base, because personally I've always been a fan of both Marvel and DC. I'm not a Marvel fan or a DC fan. I'm a superhero fan, if it makes sense, or a comic book fan. So for me, it felt like a cool idea to have Wolverine in the DC universe fighting alongside Batman and Superman and defeating Bane. Sadly, it wasn't a good idea. So the DC fans were mad that I was using a Marvel character in a DC game, and the Marvel fans were mad that I was using a Marvel character in a DC game. So it was pretty much a lose-lose scenario. So that pretty much was the biggest mistake I made when I started this channel. I should have started with, at the very least, either an amalgam character, like the Dark Claw character that is an amalgam of Batman and Wolverine, or even better yet, I should have made a Batman character and just go with that. But what can you do? You live and learn, and that's probably also why some of you guys may be wondering why I don't make Marvel videos all that often. It's quite simply because players don't seem to appreciate them as much. For example, I can make a video, let's say about Wolverine. I'll have, I don't know, 800 people who will watch that video, but they will watch that video for like 2 minutes, and after 2 minutes already that video will have dropped to 50% of the people watching it, and by the end of the video I'll be lucky if 5% of the people are still watching it, as opposed to other videos like when I made my videos about the evil Black Lantern Batman. If let's say 800 people would watch the video, by the end of the video barely 5% would have stopped watching the video. So when I use Marvel characters, yes, there are some views for that video, but people don't stick around for that video. They'll quit. Most of the people quit that video after the first few minutes, and very few people stay until the end of the video. As opposed to if I make a video with a DC character, sometimes it even if it doesn't get as many views, the fact that people watch the whole thing makes a pretty big difference. So to answer the question, is DC Universe Online dead? I would say the answer obviously is no. There's a few signs that show us that the game is not dead. The first one is the fact that they're making a version of the game for Switch. If the game was dead, if the game was dying, they would not put that many resources to make a new version for a new console. So the fact that they're making DC Universe Online for a new console pretty much tells us that the game is actually doing well, and they're looking to expand. Basically, if you're in trouble, if you're dying, if your game is dying, you don't try to expand. You try to salvage whatever you have. When you try to expand a franchise or a license, it's not because things are going badly. Usually, it's because it's doing pretty good, and you're trying to improve on that. Also, we're seeing a whole bunch of upgrades. Like they've remade the opening mission, the tutorial mission, and the Brainiac ship. They wouldn't go through that trouble if the game was dying. They're upgrading the graphics slowly but surely. Like they've upgraded the Batman model, the Wonder Woman model, and slowly they're upgrading the models. They've upgraded the Shazam model some time ago with the Justice League Dark DLC. They've upgraded even with the Superman. They've upgraded the Superman model when they gave us the Earth 3 DLC. So if the game was in such trouble, they wouldn't do that. But if you're playing on a low population server, like in the past, if you would play like as a villain on PC, you could think that the game was dead because there wasn't that many players. Although ever since they merged the PC and the PlayStation server, I would be curious to see if it's still the case. But from what I understand, also people on Xbox would complain about that. Again, I strongly suspect if you're playing as a villain player on Xbox, it could be that it may seem like there's a low population. Or you are playing on a low population server, so you think that because there's not that many people playing on your server, that it's the same everywhere, and so obviously the game is dead. And my point is, it depends on the server you're playing. It depends on even the faction you're playing. So if you're playing on the US server as opposed to the European server, you will have more players on the US server, you will have less players on the European server. If you're playing as a hero or a villain, a lot more players play heroes than villains. If you're playing on Xbox or on PS4, PC, again, a lot more players play on PS4, and the PC servers are merged with PS4, so that means a bit of extra players, again, for that server. So basically it comes down to if you're playing as a villain player on Xbox, on the European server, for example, you might think that the game is dead because that's probably the server that has the lowest population. As opposed to if you play as a hero player on PS4, then you probably are. When you see the threads on the forum saying that the game is dead, you're probably scratching your head, wondering how come. Because there are plenty of players that play on PS4 on the hero side. There are players who are hoping that someday they will merge the PC server, the PlayStation server, and the Xbox server all together, and now with Switch coming up, people are adding Switch to that. People are hoping that everyone will be able to play together eventually. I have to admit, it would be kind of cool, and it would mean more players to play with. But I guess we're going to have to wait and see if that ever happens. In theory, it should be able to happen. Sadly, that means convincing big corporations to collaborate together and work together. And that is quite the challenge. But somehow there's some animosity between PlayStation and Xbox for some reason, which somehow prevents that merge from happening. But who knows, maybe at some point they will merge the Xbox server with PC and PlayStation. And even better, if they merge even also the Switch server with everyone else, that would be awesome. Although for the Switch server, I would wish for them to be able to play by themselves, at least for a few months, to be able to enjoy the game with low-level characters. But eventually, if they could be merged with everyone, that would be awesome. But early on, I think it would be better for Switch to remain by themselves, because one complaint that we often see is how supposedly high-level characters ruin the game for low-level characters. So if on Switch everyone starts low level, everyone starts at the same level, then there won't be any. Well, there should not be any such complaints. But I guess we're gonna have to wait and see for that. So again, is DC Universe Online dead? I'm pretty sure the answer is no. There's plenty of signs to let us know that DC Universe Online seems to be doing fine. The fact that it's expanding seems to suggest that it's doing fine. And again, for a lot of players, obviously if you're playing PvP, you might think that the game is dead. I will give you that. And again, if you're playing on a low populated server, you might think that the game is dead. Again, I will give you that. But the lion's share of the player base doesn't play PvP, only plays PvE. And there's quite a lot of players just on the PlayStation 4 server alone, on the hero side. Right there's quite a lot of players. So that alone tells us that the game seems to be doing fine, at least for now. Who knows, maybe in 3 months there'll be a big patch that will ruin everything. And again, people will say that the game is dead. We're gonna have to wait and see for that. So that's pretty much it for now, guys. Sorry for the long video. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask so in the comment section down below, and I'll see what I can do about answering your questions. So as always, guys, thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.